At the winter fundraising gala, my son walked onto the stage beneath the sign bearing my late wife's name and told hundreds of donors, "This sanctuary needs vision now, not an old man clinging to dying animals." The room went silent. Then my daughter-in-law leaned toward me, smiling coldly. "You should be grateful we still let you sit here." I looked down at the old dog resting beside my chair, his blinking green collar catching the light. Then I looked back at them and said, "No, you should be afraid I stayed right here tonight. I'm glad you're here with me for this one." That morning, I had spotted my son's car in the parking lot at 6 o'clock in the morning, 3 hours before he ever arrived, and I knew something had already begun that I had not yet seen. I was 69 years old, a former firefighter who had spent 26 years building Callaway Ridge Animal Sanctuary alongside my wife Nadine, and I had learned inside burning buildings that smoke appears before fire. Derek's black Audi sat in the gravel lot next to Renee's car. The two of them were standing near the oak tree at the edge of the property, studying the land with the fixed attention people reserve for things they are sizing up. Scout walked beside me, the way he had every morning since Nadine passed away 6 weeks ago. He was an 11-year-old rescue dog with arthritis in his hind legs, gray around the muzzle, the kind of animal other shelters had long since written off as unadoptable. Welcome to his hidden revenge. I'm glad you're here. If stories like this one stay with you, consider following along. There are more where this came from, and I think you'll want to hear them. While you listen today, I'd love to know, what are you doing right now? Driving somewhere, resting at the end of a long day, maybe cooking or folding laundry. Drop it in the comments. A note on this story: some details and dialogue have been shaped for storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. He had slept beside Nadine's chair every night through her chemotherapy. And when she stopped waking up, he stopped leaving my side. We did the morning patrol together. Same route Nadine and I had walked since 1996. Check the perimeter fence, count the outdoor kennels, make sure no one had left food where raccoons could get to it. Scout knew every turn without being told. He stopped at the garden corner where Nadine used to sit with her coffee and her notebook, writing down things that needed fixing. The bench was still there. The notebook was in my truck. Scout stared at the empty space for 10 seconds, then looked up at me with eyes that understood absence. I rested my hand on his head. Neither of us said anything. We had been doing this every morning since the funeral. The sanctuary was quiet, except for the dogs stirring in the kennels and the sound of Derek's car door closing somewhere in the distance. My son, 38 years old, the sanctuary's CFO, stood with his wife Renee beside him. She was 35, a PR specialist for luxury brands, and she measured the property with her eyes the way developers size up square footage. They did not see me. They were too absorbed in whatever they were calculating. I finished the patrol and went inside to make coffee. By the time the sun came up, both cars were gone. That was the thing about grief. It made you blind to what was right in front of you, like your own son sizing up the land you built with your wife's ashes barely cold in the ground. 3 days later, Holden Farwell arrived with a check. He was 61, CEO of Farwell Pacific Realty, the kind of man who wore expensive suits to animal sanctuaries and called it humility. He brought a photographer and a reporter named Callum Breck, 35, from the Seattle Times, who showed up with his notebook ready to write what he assumed was a straightforward donation story. The check was for $75,000. Holden stood in the parking lot at noon, with Derek and Renee flanking him, all three of them smiling for the camera while Callum took notes. I watched from the office doorway. Scout sat at my feet. "This sanctuary does incredible work," Holden said to the camera, his hand resting on Derek's shoulder, as though they were lifelong friends. "Nadine Callaway built something truly special here, and I'm honored to support her legacy." Derek smiled. Renee nodded. Callum wrote it all down. The photo session lasted 15 minutes. Handshakes, smiles, the check held up for the camera. Then Callum packed his equipment, thanked everyone, and left. I stayed in the doorway. I had learned in 28 years of firefighting that the real story starts after the cameras leave. Holden walked with Derek toward the property's edge near the oak tree where I had seen them 3 days earlier. Renee followed. They stopped at the fence line, looking out over the 12 acres Nadine and I had cleared by hand in 1996. I could not hear them from the office, but I stepped outside and moved toward the kennels close enough. Holden's voice carried in the still air. He wasn't whispering, but he wasn't projecting either, just loud enough for Derek to hear, just quiet enough to believe no one else would catch it. "The land alone is worth 12 million, Holden said. "The brand is worth another 3. Don't waste it on dogs that nobody wants." Derek said nothing. He nodded. Renee looked at her phone. I stood 20 feet away beside the kennel gate, close enough to hear every word, far enough that they had not spotted me yet. Scout sat beside me, silent. Holden turned and saw me. He did not look surprised. He did not look guilty. He gave me a polite nod, the kind you give a stranger in a parking lot, and said, "Mr. Calloway." Then he walked to his car and drove away. Derek and Renee followed 30 seconds later. Neither of them looked at me. I stood there a long time after they left Scout at my feet, looking out over the land Nadine and I had built from nothing. We had cleared the trees ourselves, poured the concrete for the kennels, driven every fence post into the ground one at a time. She had painted the sign by hand, Calloway Ridge Animal Sanctuary. No abandoned soul turned away. 26 years, $12 million. Dogs that nobody wants. He had said it out loud. The same words Nadine had made me promise 26 years ago I would never let anyone say about a single animal that came through our gates. I said nothing. I went back to the kennels and fed the old ones first the way I always do. The ones with arthritis, the blind cat in Kennel 7, the shepherd mix, who had been returned 4 times before we took him in for good. But I started keeping notes that afternoon. Old habit from the firehouse. When you do not know what evidence will matter, you write everything down. I recorded the date, the time, exactly what Holden said, exactly where Derek was standing when he nodded. I wrote it in Nadine's notebook, the one from the garden bench on the page after her last entry bench by Oak Needs Fixing. I did not yet know what I was building a case for, but I knew smoke when I saw it, and I had understood for a long time that smoke always means fire is on its way. Scout slept under my chair while I wrote his collar tag, clinking softly against the metal bowl I kept filled with water beside the desk. 2 weeks later, Renee would begin her campaign, and I would understand exactly what Holden's whisper had meant. 2 weeks after I started keeping notes, Renee walked through the sanctuary hallway with a clipboard in one hand and her phone camera in the other, photographing every dirty corner she had helped create herself. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the kennel staff was stretched thin. I was cleaning the back row of cages, the ones that house the older dogs with incontinence issues and arthritis. Scout lay in the doorway watching me work. Renee stopped at Kennel 14 where the floor had not been mopped since morning. She took a photo. Then she wrote something on her clipboard. She moved to Kennel 16 where the water bowl had dried out because we no longer had enough volunteers to check them twice a day. Another photo. More notes. I kept cleaning. I did not look at her. I had learned in 28 years of firefighting that some people start fires just to watch you scramble to put them out. Nadia Fowler stood near the supply closet watching. She was 17 years old, a volunteer who had been coming to the sanctuary every weekend for 2 years, helping with the animals the way some teenagers help, because their parents make them, and some help because they genuinely understand what it means to care for things that cannot speak for themselves. Nadia was the second kind. Renee stopped in the center of the hallway and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "People donate for the animals," she announced to the staff members within earshot, her voice carrying the rehearsed tone of someone performing spontaneous concern. "Not for an old man who smells like wet fur?" Nadia looked at me. I met her eyes for 1 second, then went back to cleaning. I did not respond. I finished mopping Kennel 14, refilled the water bowl in 16, and logged both tasks in the daily checklist Nadine had designed in 1996. Entry 47 in my notebook would be written that evening. Date, time, witnesses' exact words. Renee left 20 minutes later, her clipboard loaded with photos documenting neglect that had not existed before she cut the cleaning budget 3 months ago. There is a particular kind of cruelty in being humiliated inside the walls you built with your own hands by someone who married into your name and learned to say it like an insult. Nadia stayed after Renee left. She did not ask if I was all right. She just picked up a mop and started cleaning Kennel 17 without being asked. That evening, Derek came to my office. He stood in the doorway for 10 seconds before speaking, the way people stand when they have rehearsed what they are about to say, but not how to begin saying it. "Dad," he said finally, "the sanctuary is losing money every quarter. Mom is gone. You can't run this alone. We need to think about the future." I looked up from the computer where I had been going over the quarterly budget, the same budget Renee had rewritten 3 months ago to cut costs in precisely the areas that would make the sanctuary appear neglected. Whose future? I asked. He stepped into the office. He was 38 years old, my son. The boy I had raised to understand that no one gets left behind, that every life matters, regardless of whether it is convenient or profitable. Holden Farwell has a proposal, he said. It keeps the Callaway name. It modernizes everything. You'd still be involved. Sick animals aren't a business model, Derek, I said. Maybe that's the problem. The words sat between us like smoke. I thought about Nadine's notebook entry from 6 weeks before she died. Bench by oak needs fixing. Small things that needed attention, small things she knew I would see after she was gone. Your mother built this place for animals that no one else wanted, I said. That was the whole point. We don't turn away the ones that cost too much, or live too long, or need more care than they're worth to anyone else. That's what makes this a sanctuary instead of a business. And that's why it's failing, Derek said. Scout was sitting by my chair. He watched Derek the way he had watched Nadine during her final months, with the steady attention of an animal who understands when something is ending. Holden's proposal keeps the mission, Derek continued. It just makes it sustainable. You're 70 years old. You can't do this alone. I'm trying to help you. By photographing dirty cages your wife created by cutting the budget. He stopped. His expression shifted not with guilt, but with the recognition that I had been paying attention. Renee is trying to show investors what needs to change, he said after a moment. Investors. I repeated it. Dad, this isn't 1996 anymore. We can't run a sanctuary on good intentions. I looked at him and saw the boy he had been standing at the window on his 8th birthday watching me back out of the driveway to go save a dog that had been struck by a car on Highway 2. Nadine had called while we were cutting the cake. A family had found the dog on the roadside still breathing and brought it to us because they knew we never said no. I left Derek's party. I told him I'd be back in an hour. I told him we would finish the birthday after I saved the dog. The surgery took 4 hours. By the time I got home, the guests were gone and Derek was asleep in his room. His birthday cake sat unfinished on the table. Nadine told me he had stood at that window for 2 hours waiting. How do you explain to your son that you did not choose the animals over him, that you chose what you had promised to do? The same promise you made him learn, that you never leave anyone behind. How do you tell him 28 years later that the lesson he took from that night was not the one you meant to give him? I'm not selling, I said. Derek nodded slowly. He looked at me the way you look at someone you have already decided cannot be reached. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. He pulled the door shut behind him. Scout sat by my chair and watched that door for a long time. After Derek was gone, the way dogs watch doors, when they sensed that whoever walked out did not leave the same person they came in. 3 weeks after Derek closed that door, Dr. Roland Kepler looked up from the pharmacy shelf and asked me a question I did not know how to answer. Did you approve this? I was in the sanctuary pharmacy doing inventory, something Nadine and I had done together every Monday morning for 26 years. Scout lay near the door watching both of us. Dr. Kepler was 45, the sanctuary's veterinarian for 12 years. The kind of doctor who came out at midnight for emergency calls and never sent a bill when we were short. He held a medication bottle in one hand and Nadine's prescription log in the other. What switch? I asked. The arthritis medication for the senior dogs. This isn't the prescription I wrote. This is a generic that damages kidneys over time. He handed me the bottle. The label was different from the one Nadine had always ordered. The active ingredient had been changed. I didn't approve this, I said. He showed me the pharmacy receipt, the one filed 3 months ago in the medication log. Derek's signature at the bottom. The date was mid-August, 2 weeks after Nadine's oncologist told us the chemotherapy had stopped working. This isn't a budget decision, Vincent Dr. Kepler said, his voice flat, and measured the way doctors sound when they are working hard not to sound furious. This is negligence, or worse. I took the receipt and read it twice. The medication cost $22 less per bottle. We had 11 senior dogs on arthritis medication. The savings over 3 months would have been about $240. Nadine had been dying. Derek had signed a document that would slowly poison the animals she had devoted her life, to most of them too old and too sick for anyone else to want, the very ones she had built this sanctuary to protect. I put the receipt in my pocket. Old habit from the firehouse. When you do not know what evidence will matter, you keep everything. Can you write me a list of which dogs have been on this medication? I asked. Already did, Dr. Kepler said. He handed me a page with 11 names. I'm switching them back to the original prescription today. But Vincent, you need to know 3 months on this could have caused permanent damage. I'll run blood work on all of them. I looked at the list. Scout's name was at the top. There is a particular violence in discovering that your son signed a document that would slowly poison the animals your dying wife asked you to protect, not with his fists, but with an accountant's pen 3 months before she took her last breath. Thank you, I said. Dr. Kepler left to run the blood work. I walked to my truck and placed the receipt and the medication bottle in the lockbox I kept under the driver's seat, the same lockbox where I had been storing notes since Holden's whisper at the fence line. Entry 73. 1 week later, Norbert Crane knocked on my office door. He was 65, my neighbor for 19 years. A retired police chief who had moved into the house beside the sanctuary after his wife died, and never explained why he stayed. He came over twice a week to help with fence repairs and never asked for anything in return. He was holding a stack of printouts. You need to see this, he said. I took the papers. They were screenshots from Reddit, an anonymous post in a local Seattle community forum. The username was Callaway Watch 19. The post had been up for 6 days. Old man losing control. Animals neglected. Founder mentally declining after wife's death. Someone needs to step in before these animals suffer more. There was a photo attached. I recognized it immediately, the dirty storage shed Renee had photographed with her clipboard 4 weeks ago. I traced the account, Norbert said, settling into the chair across from my desk without waiting to be invited. It was created 3 weeks ago, posted from a device registered to Renee Holt. I looked at the registration information he had printed. The device owner was listed as R. Holt, registered to the sanctuary's address. Holt was Nadine's maiden name, the name the sanctuary staff accounts had originally been set up under. Renee had used it deliberately, wanting the post to appear as though it came from someone inside the family bloodline, not a woman who had married into it. And she used my wife's maiden name, I said. She wanted it to look like it came from inside the family, Norbert said. More credible that way. Someone concerned about their aging father-in-law, worried about the animals posting anonymously because they don't want to hurt him publicly. I read the post again. The language was careful, compassionate sounding. It painted a picture of a grieving old man who could no longer carry the weight he had shouldered for decades. It suggested intervention out of love, not cruelty. There are 43 comments, Norbert said. Most of them sympathetic, a few asking whether anyone has contacted animal control. I set the printouts on my desk beside Nadine's notebook, the one where I had been documenting everything since Holden's whisper about wasting $12 million on unwanted dogs. How did you find this? I asked. I've been watching, Norbert said simply. Searching your name variations on the sanctuary's name. Figured if they were going to run a campaign, they'd start online where it's anonymous and spreads fast. When does a campaign stop being opportunistic and become systematic? When they photograph the dirt, when they spread the rumor, or when they register a device in your own family name to make the lie look like it came from someone who loves you. Keep watching, Norbert said, standing to leave. I'll keep tracking. Whatever they're building toward, they're not finished yet. He left the printouts on my desk. Scout had not moved from his spot by the door, watching Norbert leave, the same way he had watched Derek leave 3 weeks before, with the quiet attention of an animal who knows when someone matters. Norbert had been my neighbor for 19 years. He never once asked me to justify my trust in him. He just showed up every time I needed someone to show up. I placed the printouts in the lockbox alongside the medication bottle, Derek's signature on the pharmacy receipt, the notes from Holden's whisper at the fence line, and the photos from Renee's clipboard campaign. Entry 73. The evidence was building faster than I had expected. 4 days after Norbert showed me the Reddit post, Callum Breck arrived with his camera and his notebook, and I watched my son put on a performance I had never seen him rehearse. Callum had called the day before to arrange the visit. He said Derek had invited him back to do a follow-up piece on the sanctuary's future. I said that was fine. I did not tell him I already knew what Derek was planning. They started the tour at the North Kennels, the ones with rusted chain link that needed replacing. Derek walked ahead of Callum, gesturing at the fencing, his voice carrying that particular tone of concerned disappointment that sounds compassionate until you pay attention to what is actually being said. My father built something remarkable here. Derek said, pausing to let Callum photograph the deteriorating structure behind him. But he's living in the past. He chose the animals over everything else for years. Over family dinners, over my school events, over my mother when she was sick. Now I'm trying to choose the sanctuary's future before it's too late. Callum wrote it down. I stood near the office doorway with Scout at my feet watching. Derek pointed to the storage shed Renee had photographed weeks earlier, the one with the dirty floor and the broken window. He described deferred maintenance, outdated practices, a founder who refused to adapt. Every word was true, and every word was a lie. The fence was rusted because Derek had cut the maintenance budget. The shed was dirty because Renee had reduced the cleaning staff. The outdated practices were the same ones that kept animals alive when other shelters had written them off as unadoptable. Derek saw me watching. He did not look away. He just kept talking. What does it cost a man to stand in front of a camera and describe his father as incompetent, using words practiced in a mirror the night before, knowing the article will run with a photo that makes the old man look exactly as defeated as the son claimed? After 20 minutes, Callum walked over to where I was standing. "Mr. Calloway," he said, notebook ready. "Your son says the sanctuary needs modernization. What do you say?" I looked at Callum, then at Derek standing 30 feet away near the storage shed, waiting to hear what I would say that he could turn against me. "Come back in a month," I said. Callum laughed, caught off guard. "That's not really an answer." "It will be," I said. He wrote that down too. Then he thanked me for my time, took 3 more photos of the rusted fence and left. The article ran on Thursday. The headline read, "Animal Sanctuary Founder Resists Change as Facility Deteriorates." My photo was on the front page standing in the doorway with Scout beside me. I looked old in it. I suppose I was. 69 years old, gray hair, weathered face, wearing the same coat I had worn for 15 years. Because Nadine said it suited me, and I never saw a reason to replace it. The article quoted Derek extensively. It mentioned deferred maintenance, declining leadership, and concerns from family members who wished to remain anonymous. It made me sound like a man who had built something good and then refused to let it grow. Norbert called me that afternoon. He did not ask if I was all right. He just said he was watching and would let me know when anything else turned up. 1 week later, he called again. "There were 2 men walking the perimeter this morning," Norbert said, skipping any greeting. "Measuring, taking photos of the structures. I got their plates and I asked, 'Demolition company,' he said. 'Farwell Pacific Realty owns it.'" I was sitting at Nadine's desk when he told me this. Her notebook lay open in front of me, the page where I had been logging dates, events, and signatures. Entry 84. The Holden hired a demolition crew. I said, slowly, making sure I understood what Norbert was telling me. "Before the transfer contract is signed," Norbert confirmed. "Before he legally owns anything? That's a hell of a lot of confidence." I wrote it down. December 14th. 2 men. Demolition company. Farwell Pacific Realty. They had sent a crew before they owned the land, before any contract was signed, before I had agreed to a single thing, the kind of certainty that only comes from knowing something I did not. "Yep, they think this is already done," I said. "Yeah," Norbert said. "Question is, why are they so sure?" I sat there after he hung up, looking at the timeline I had been assembling in Nadine's notebook. Holden's whisper in November, the medication switch signed in August, Renee's campaign starting in October, the Reddit post 3 weeks ago, the article last week. Now a demolition crew measuring structures Holden did not own. The pattern was not opportunistic. It was systematic, and it was rushed. I thought about Nadine's will, the one her lawyer had walked me through 6 weeks after the funeral, the trust she had established in 2018, the clause about Derek demonstrating unwillingness to honor the sanctuary's mission, the automatic transfer of ownership and control to the trust, if that clause was ever triggered. Renee had been at the will reading. She had sat in the lawyer's office with Derek, listening to every word. She had asked questions about the trust terms, about the triggers, about what would happen if Derek's management decisions conflicted with Nadine's stated mission. The lawyer had answered them all. I sat in the truck with that realization, the demolition crew, the timeline, the rushing. Renee had known about the trust. She had known from the beginning. She knew that if they moved slowly, if I had time to document their actions and prove they were violating Nadine's mission, the trust would trigger and Derek would lose everything. That was why they were moving fast. Not because they were impatient, because they were racing against evidence. And that changed everything about what came next. I opened the lockbox under the driver's seat and added the note about the demolition crew to the stack. receipt for the switched medication, screenshots of the Reddit post, copy of the article, photos of Renee's clipboard campaign. Holden's whisper documented in my own handwriting. Entry 84. 2 days later, Nadia Fowler would stay late cleaning the warehouse and see something through a crack in an office door that she would photograph and send to me at 11 at night. The photograph arrived on my phone at 11 at night. A single image from Nadia Fowler, no explanation, just a company name I had never heard of, and a woman's hand I recognized signing something I could not yet read. I was at my desk finishing paperwork when the text came through. The image was grainy shot through what looked like a gap in a doorway. Renee's hand was visible in the lower right corner, her signature halfway complete on a document spread across a desk. Across from her sat a man in a dark jacket I did not recognize. The company letterhead at the top of the page read, Pacific Animal Relocation Services. Nadia's text came through 15 seconds later. Mr. Calloway, I was cleaning late, found this company has history, looked it up. Then, sending everything. 3 more messages followed in rapid succession, each one a screenshot of search results. Pacific Animal Relocation Services. Investigated 2018 Washington. Mass euthanization charges, case settled. Same company, different name. 2019 Oregon. Animal cruelty investigation, settled out of court. California, 2020. 73 animals destroyed in 12 hours. Company re-registered under a new LLC structure in 2021. I sat there reading the same lines over and over, making sure I understood what I was looking at. Nadia had been cleaning the warehouse. She had stayed late the way she often did on weekends, mopping floors, organizing supplies, without being asked, because she understood what it meant to care for things that needed caring for. She had seen light under Derek's office door after hours. She had looked through the gap and seen Renee signing a contract with a man whose company had killed animals for money in 3 states and changed its name to keep doing it. I called Nadia. She answered on the first ring. Are you safe? I asked. I'm home, she said. They didn't see me. I left right after I took the photo. Good, I said. Don't come back for a few days. Tell your parents you're taking some time off from volunteering. Mr. Calloway, that contract scared me. I know, I said. Thank you. I hung up and looked at the photo again. Renee's signature. The date at the top of the contract 3 weeks ago. Before Callum's article. Before the demolition crew. Before she had any legal standing to sign anything on behalf of a sanctuary she did not own. There is a difference between knowing someone wants to take what you built and knowing they have already signed the contract to kill everything inside it. One is greed. The other is murder with a corporate letterhead and a signature that matches your daughter-in-law's handwriting. I forwarded the photo and every one of Nadia's screenshots to Norbert in a single message. Document this. Then I headed out to my truck. Scout followed the way he always does. He climbed into the passenger seat and settled with his chin resting on his paws, watching me the way dogs watch when they sense something is wrong but can't name it. I sat there holding my phone. The lot was empty around me. The sanctuary had gone quiet except for the low sounds of animals settling in for the night in the kennels at my back. I opened the photo again and zoomed in on the contract language. The text was too small to make out clearly, but I had seen enough. Service agreement timeline 30 days after transfer of ownership. Scope complete removal and relocation of all animals classified as unadoptable or medical liability. Relocation. They couldn't even bring themselves to use the honest word. My mind went to those 73 animals in California destroyed in 12 hours. A company that knew how to move fast, how to make living things vanish before anyone could put it on record, before lawyers could file injunctions, before the cameras could show up. Renee had hired them 3 weeks ago. I looked over at Scout sleeping on the passenger seat. His GPS collar blinked green in the dark, the same collar Derek had insisted we put on all the senior dogs 3 months ago for safety tracking. The same collar I had thought was overkill at the time, but never challenged because Derek said it was standard practice. The light pulsed green steady recording. I stared at it for 10 seconds before the realization landed. The collar hadn't just been logging location. It had been capturing audio for 3 weeks. Every conversation, every whisper. I had been so fixed on keeping notes in my lockbox that I'd lost sight of what had been recording itself all along. Every exchange near Scout, every hushed word, every meeting held in rooms where they figured a sleeping dog couldn't possibly matter. Holden's voice in the parking lot, The land alone is worth 12 million. Don't waste it on dogs that nobody wants. Renee's campaign in the hallway right in front of staff. People donate for the animals, not for an old man who smells like wet fur. Derek's performance for Callum. He's living in the past. He chose the animals over everything else for years. Every word captured, time-stamped, stored on a device they had bought and fitted themselves. The caller had been recording for 3 weeks. Every whispered remark Holden thought I couldn't catch. Every word Renee spoke when she believed an old dog was just furniture. Every plan they laid in rooms where Scout slept. And I hadn't known. I looked at my phone, the photo of Renee's signature, the company that had killed animals across 3 states, the contract dated 3 weeks back. Then I looked at Scout's collar, blinking green in the dark. I had spent 2 months gathering evidence, writing it into Nadine's notebook, locking away receipts, logging dates and times and witnesses. But the most damning record of all had been making itself worn around the neck of an arthritic dog they had written off as too old to be worth anything. I sat in that truck until 3 o'clock in the morning. Scout on the passenger seat collar, blinking green, Renee's signed contract, glowing on my phone screen, and the oldest question a man can put to himself, turning over and over. How much evidence do you need before you stop collecting it and start doing something with it? 4 days later, I would find the answer in a storage room, a clipboard holding 23 names written in red ink, and Scout's name was the last one on the list. 4 days after sitting in that truck, asking myself when to move, I found the clipboard in the storage room, and the question became beside the point because the last name written in red was Scout's. I had gone to the storage room to locate Nadine's medical files, the ones that documented the care protocols for elderly dogs she had built over 26 years. The clipboard was sitting on top of the filing cabinet face up, as if someone had left it there knowing I would find it. The header read, Resource Reallocation Assessment. Below that, 23 names. I knew every one of them. Bella, the blind shepherd mix. Nadine had bottle-fed in 2018 when she came in half-starved. Remove. Samson, the 3-legged retriever who met every visitor at the gate. Remove. Duke, the 16-year-old cat with kidney disease who dozed in the sun beside the office window. Remove. I went through each name one by one, dogs who had lived here for years, cats who were blind, animals Nadine had hand-fed in their final months. Every name had the word remove in red marker beside it, followed by cold clinical language. Low adoption value, medical liability, terminal condition, behavioral issues, 22 names. And then the last one, Scout 11 years arthritic low adoption value. I set the clipboard down on the filing cabinet. I lowered myself to the storage room floor, my back against the shelving. Scout stood in the doorway watching me, his head tilted the way dogs tilt their heads when they sense something is wrong but don't know what. For the first time in this entire stretch of discoveries, I didn't know what came next. Scout had slept beside Nadine's chair every night for 11 years. He had watched her die, watched me grieve, never left my side through a single moment of it. And they had assigned him a number and a red marker and the word remove as if those 11 years of loyalty added up to exactly nothing. I sat there for 20 minutes. Then I stood up, took the clipboard, and walked to the meeting room where I knew Derek and Renee would be going over the week's financials with the staff. It was afternoon. 5 staff members were seated around the conference table with laptops and spreadsheets. Derek stood at the head of the table, pointing to a budget projection on the screen. Renee sat in the corner, checking messages on her phone. I walked in and placed the clipboard at the center of the table. "Whose list is this?" I asked. The room went still. The staff members looked at the clipboard, then at me, then at Derek. Renee's face didn't shift. She glanced up from her phone with the calm, deliberate attention of someone who had been expecting this moment. "It's a resource allocation assessment," she said evenly. "It has my dog's name on it," I said, with the word remove. Derek set down the budget report he'd been holding. He looked at the clipboard, then at Renee, then back at me. "Dad," he said carefully, "we have to make hard decisions." "Hard decisions," I repeated. The staff members hadn't moved. Nobody was looking at their laptops. Every eye was on me. "These are animals Nadine saved," I said, my voice still level, but climbing. "Every single one of these names. She fed them. She medicated them. She sat with them when they were dying, because no one else would." "And that's exactly the problem," Renee said, her tone perfectly controlled. "This sanctuary cannot survive if it keeps functioning as hospice care for animals with no adoption potential." adoption potential. I said. I could feel something coming loose inside me, the composure I had held together through 2 months of uncovering betrayal after betrayal, the discipline that had taken 28 years of staying calm inside burning buildings, while people screamed. "You put Scout on a list," I said, my voice rising. "The dog who slept beside my dying wife for 11 months. The dog who hasn't left my side since the day of the funeral. You wrote remove next to his name like he was a broken tool you were throwing out." Derek started to speak. I didn't let him. "This place was built to save lives," I said, and I brought my hand down on the table hard enough that the clipboard jumped. "Not to erase what wealthy people don't want to look at." The staff members pushed back from the table. One of them stood up. Renee didn't move. She was holding her phone up aimed at me. Recording. "You built this sanctuary with good intentions," Renee said, steady still recording. "But you're not capable of managing it anymore. This outburst proves it." She had been recording me, not because I was making a scene, but because she had built the scene specifically to record it, the way you dress a stage before you invite an audience to watch someone come apart on cue. The clipboard had been placed on top of that filing cabinet on purpose. She had known I would find it. She had known I would confront them. She had been standing by with her phone, waiting for me to lose control in front of witnesses. I looked at Derek. He was staring at the table, not meeting my eyes. "You knew about this," I said to him. He didn't answer. I picked up the clipboard and walked out of the meeting room. Scout followed me out. Behind me, I could hear Renee speaking to the staff, something about stress, grief, deteriorating judgment, her voice even and controlled, still recording. I walked to my truck and settled into the driver's seat. Scout jumped up into the passenger seat beside me, his collar blinking green, still capturing everything. I had spent 2 months building a case, documents, photographs, testimonies, recordings I hadn't even known were out there. And in 30 seconds of losing my temper, Renee had gathered evidence that I was exactly what she had been claiming all along. She was smiling at her phone screen while recording me. Not a broad smile, just the corner of her mouth. The kind that means you got exactly what you came for. That night, Derek would come home to find Renee showing him the video, and she would hand him an ultimatum that forced him to choose between his father and everything else he thought he wanted. 2 days after I lost my composure on camera, Norbert sent me photographs of my son sitting in a restaurant with Holden Farwell, and on the table between them was a sketch with my family's name crossed out and replaced with something that sounded like money. But before those photographs reached me, there was a conversation I wasn't there to witness. Norbert told me about it. Later, he had been watching Derek's house that night. Renee had shown Derek the video in their living room. Derek on the couch. Renee standing with her phone extended like a piece of courtroom evidence. "And this is our proof," she said. "Mental instability. We file for guardianship." "He's not mentally ill, Renee," Derek said. "He was angry. It doesn't matter what he is. It matters what it looks like on video." Silence. Then Renee laid out her ultimatum. "Either your father goes or I do. And if I leave, I take the Holden Farwell deal with me." Norbert said Derek sat very still with his eyes fixed on the floor. Then he said one word. "Fine. When does a childhood wound stop being just a memory and become a reason when you're 8? Watching your father choose a bleeding dog over your birthday cake? Or, when you're 38, watching your wife give you an ultimatum and realizing you have spent your whole life waiting for permission to choose something other than him?" I didn't know about that conversation yet. What I knew was this. 2 days later, Norbert tailed Derek to a restaurant in suburban Redmond and photographed him with Holden Farwell. The photographs landed on my phone at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 6 images of Derek and Holden bent over architectural drawings. Coffee cups shoved to the side, Holden pointing, Derek nodding along. I zoomed in on the sketch. A resort courtyard with a heated lap pool, pet spa with temperature-regulated suites. Luxury accommodations with amenities listed in polished script, chef-prepared pet meals, hydrotherapy, aromatherapy, behavioral coaching room, rates $3,200 per week. At the top, where Callaway Ridge Animal Sanctuary had appeared on every sign for 26 years, it now read, Silver Pines Luxury Pet Resort by Sutton Pacific. They had erased us. Not just the mission, not just the animals, The name Nadine and I had chosen together in 1996 when we buried our savings into land nobody else wanted gone, replaced with something expensive that meant nothing. I sat in my truck staring at those photographs. Scout in the passenger seat collar, blinking green. I thought about Nadine painting that sign by hand in our driveway, 7 months pregnant with Derek, saying the name mattered because it was a promise. Callaway Ridge, our family's commitment. Derek had signed it away for a resort that charged more per week than most people in this county earned in a month. There is a particular violence in watching your family name get scrubbed from the thing you built with your dying wife's last savings, replaced with words that cost $3,200 a week and mean absolutely nothing to anyone who ever slept in a kennel because they had nowhere else to go. I studied the photograph. Derek's face in profile smiling not broadly, just that slight lift at the corner of his mouth that meant he was pleased. The same smile from when he was 12 and won a debate arguing a position he didn't actually believe. The same smile when he finished business school and told me he was going to make real money, not nonprofit money. The smile that meant he had won something. I forwarded the photographs to my lockbox file, entry 107. How much evidence do you need before you stop collecting it and start acting on it? I had documentation of medication switches, screenshots of smear campaigns, photos of demolition crews, a destruction contract, a list with my dog's name marked for removal, and now photographs of my son erasing my family's name. I opened the glove compartment. Inside was a business card I had held onto for 4 years. The edges had gone soft from the single time I handled it when it arrived. Petra Aldridge, attorney at law. I had not spoken to Petra in 4 years. The last time I saw her, she was 27 and had just cleared the bar. She had been a sanctuary volunteer for 14 years. Before that, since she was 13, turning up every weekend to clean kennels and never asking for anything except to be allowed to keep coming back. When she finished law school, she sent me a card. It said if I ever needed help, she would be there. I had placed it in the glove compartment and never called because I hadn't needed help then. I needed it now. I held the card, Petra's number, printed in small text at the bottom. I had memorized it 4 years ago without even trying. Scout shifted in the passenger seat. His collar blinked green, still recording. I took out my phone and keyed in Petra's number. My thumb rested over the call button. The next day, Claudette Gideon would walk into a coffee shop near the sanctuary carrying 18 months of financial records, and the number she would give me was larger than I had allowed myself to imagine possible. The next day, Claudette Gideon told me a number, $340,000. And for a moment, I couldn't make sense of what that number meant, only that it was bigger than I had dared to picture. We were sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the sanctuary. Claudette was 58, the sanctuary's former accountant who had worked with Nadine and me for 14 years, before Derek pushed her out 2 years ago, citing budget restructuring. She had held on to every financial record from her time there and had been quietly tracking the sanctuary's public filings ever since. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were 18 months of donation statements, bank transfers, and invoices. He's been moving money since Nadine got sick, Claudette said. Small amounts at first, then larger. The total is $340,000 over 14 months. I worked through the numbers. The dates lined up with Nadine's diagnosis in August of the previous year, her treatments through the fall, her final weeks in June. Where did it go? I asked. Personal accounts registered in his name, Claudette said. Some went to Renee's consulting firm for services that were never rendered. Some went to vendors I've never come across. I traced a few shell companies, no addresses, no employees. I turned pages, line items, transfer dates, account numbers. The handwriting in the margins was Nadine's from before she had grown too sick to review the books herself. She had been meticulous. She had trusted Derek to carry that same care forward. There's more, Claudette said. He's been billing fictitious vet invoices vendors that don't exist, equipment that was never purchased. How much more? I asked. The fictitious billing adds another $60,000, $400,000 total, stolen while Nadine was dying. Claudette slid another folder across the table. This one was thinner. There's one more thing, she said. Her voice had dropped. The donation fund Nadine had set up for senior animals, the one she had named after your daughter Derek, closed it last month. He told the donors it had been folded into operations. It wasn't folded in, it was emptied. I opened the folder. Inside was the closure notice Derek had sent to the fund's donors. Polished language about operational efficiency and consolidated giving. The fund had held $87,000 when Nadine died. The closure statement showed a balance of zero. There is a kind of theft that reaches past money. When someone steals from a fund your dying wife built to honor the daughter you buried together, when they tell the donors it was merged, but it was really just emptied, when they turn your family's grief into line items in a ledger that serves no one but themselves. Nadine had named that fund after our daughter Vivian, whom we lost when she was 6 years old to leukemia 24 years ago. Nadine had shaped that grief into something that saved other lives, funding care for animals that were old and sick, the way Vivian had been old beyond her years, and sick beyond what any child should ever face. Derek had shut it down and taken the money. "Thank you," I said to Claudette. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, but I did know. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. 3 days later, Nadia sent me a video. She had tucked her phone inside the old dog kennel, propped behind a bag of food on the supply shelf, where it could record without being noticed. The footage showed Renee speaking to a new employee, someone young I didn't recognize who had started the week before. Renee was walking her through the sanctuary's new operational philosophy. "Dead animals don't need food," she said in the same easy tone she used to order coffee. "And the donors don't come to see old dogs. They come to feel good about themselves. Give them puppies. Get rid of the rest." The new employee nodded and kept writing. "We're rolling this out in phases," Renee continued. "Phase 1 starts after the first of the year. We'll call it resource reallocation. The public messaging will be about modernization and efficiency. But internally you need to understand this is about removing liabilities." "How do we remove them?" the employee asked. "We have a service company lined up," Renee said. "They handle it quietly. The donors never need to know. We just tell them the animals were transferred to partner facilities for specialized care." Nadia's text came with the video link. "Recorded this afternoon, uploaded to cloud, can't be deleted. Thought you should know what she says when she thinks nobody's listening." I sat in my truck and watched that video 3 times. Not because I needed to see it again, because I wanted to hold in my mind exactly how she sounded when she said it. The tone was what finished it for me. Not rage, not cold calculation, just the same unhurried inflection she used ordering a latte, as though dead animals and old dogs and getting rid of the rest were items on a menu she was running through with complete neutral efficiency. I had been assembling evidence for 3 months. I had been asking myself when to stop collecting and start doing something with it. I had been trying to give Derek chances to choose differently, to remember who his mother was, to remember what this place stood for. But Renee's voice on that recording saying, "Dead animals don't need food," delivered with the detachment of someone commenting on the weather, ended all of that. I forwarded the video to Norbert. Then I sent it to Petra with a message I had been drafting in my head for 4 years. "I need help. Can we talk?" She called me back in 3 minutes. 2 days later, I would sit in my truck with a hard case holding everything: the medication samples, the financial statements, the photographs, the videos, and for the last time, ask myself the question that had been with me since Holden's whisper. When do you stop gathering evidence and start using it? 2 nights before they took everything, I sat in my truck and made an inventory of what I had built. Not possessions, but a case, and understood for the first time that Nadine had been preparing for this fight years before I knew there would be one. The hard case sat on the passenger seat beside Scout, who was sleeping with his head on his paws. Inside, medication samples Dr. Kepler had pulled from the pharmacy shelf. Financial statements Claudette had handed me, showing funds redirected and stolen. Photos Norbert had taken Derek with Holden demolition, crews measuring the property, architectural sketches with our name crossed out. Videos Nadia had recorded of Renee's casual cruelty. Notes from every conversation, every threat, every moment since Holden's first whisper about wasting land on unwanted dogs. 3 months of evidence. 147 entries in Nadine's notebook. I lifted Nadine's will from the stack of documents Petra had sent me after our phone call. I had read it once at the lawyer's office 6 weeks after the funeral, seated beside Derek, while the attorney walked through the trust provisions. I hadn't grasped then what I was hearing. I grasped it now. I read the trust clause again carefully this time. In the event that Callaway Ridge Animal Sanctuary is converted to commercial use or demonstrates unwillingness to honor its stated mission, all ownership rights shall revert to the Nadine Holt Animal Preservation Trust. The designated trust attorney is Petra Aldridge upon reaching legal age of practice. Nadine had written Petra's name into that document in 2018 when Petra was 26 and had just cleared the bar. But Nadine had known about Petra since she was 13, since the night I came home and told my wife about finding a girl sleeping in Kennel 3 because she had nowhere else to go. Nadine had never met Petra. She had only heard me speak of her once, but she had remembered. She had placed that girl's name inside the legal protection surrounding the sanctuary we had built together, preparing for a betrayal I never saw coming. That was the thing about Nadine, she always saw further than the rest of us. She saw betrayal before it arrived, and built safeguards before they were needed. She loved so fiercely that even dying could not stop her from trying to shield what we had made together from the people who would tear it apart. I attached a backup camera to Scout's collar. Old firehouse habit. When you can't know which piece of evidence will matter, you capture everything. The next morning, they came at 5:30. I was already awake sitting in the truck in the parking lot when headlights swung through the back entrance. Pacific Animal Relocation. Services the company Nadia had photographed on Renee's contract, the one under investigation in 3 states for mass euthanization. They had brought Cage's transfer papers, a list of 23 names. I climbed out of the truck. Scout followed me. We walked to the back enclosure, where the truck had parked, engine still running, exhaust hanging in the cold December air. I stood in front of the gate and rested my hand on Scout's head. "Nobody takes them while I'm still standing here," I said. The driver looked at me, then at his phone, then back at me. He didn't move. That was when Renee arrived, filming with her phone raised like she was documenting evidence for a case she had already won. "Look at this," she said to the camera, her voice smooth and clinical. An old man hugging a sick dog in the dark and screaming at a truck. "Is this the person you want, running this facility?" Derek's car pulled in behind hers. He got out, slowly walked over to where I was standing. He looked worn out. He looked like sleep had not found him. "Dad," he said, "you're really doing this? You chose them over us for years," Derek said quietly. "Now, I'm choosing my family." He held out his hand. I knew what he wanted, the sanctuary keys, the ones Nadine and I had carried for 26 years, the ones that opened every gate and kennel and storage room in the place we had raised with our own hands. I gave them to him. He took them without meeting my eyes and walked to the back gate, unlocked it. The truck driver began moving cages. Renee went inside the office and came back with a bag, my closed Nadine's notebook. She dropped the bag on the front porch. "Take your smell with you," she said. "And take the dog that scares donors. You can both sleep outside." I stood in the yard holding the bag and Scout's leash. The founder photograph Nadine had framed and hung in the office window was already gone, replaced with nothing. I had been a firefighter for 28 years. I had walked into fires that other men turned away from. And the trick was never to stop the fire. The trick was to know where it was headed before it got there, to understand every exit before you needed one. "You just locked me out of the place I built," I said. "But you never understood it wasn't yours to lock." Renee kept filming. Derek didn't look up. I walked to my truck, settled Scout into the passenger seat, set the bag in the back, and sat behind the wheel for a long time, watching the sun rise over the sanctuary gates, over the sign Nadine had painted that still read Callaway Ridge, even though everything inside had been taken. Then I opened the glove box and took out Petra Aldridge's card. What I didn't know yet was that she had been waiting for this call for 4 years, and the soup she would bring me 2 days later would taste like the first meal that meant I was not alone anymore. I sat in that truck for 2 days without eating. On every page of Nadine's notebook, I read her handwriting describing animals I had failed to protect until I reached the last thing she ever wrote, and understood she had been protecting me even as she died. I didn't drive far from the sanctuary, 3 miles to a public parking lot, where trucks could sit overnight without drawing attention. Scout slept on the passenger seat. I sat with Nadine's notebook open across my lap. Every page was her handwriting. 26 years of documentation. Each animal that had come through our gates, she had recorded their arrival, their condition, their care. I read them aloud to Scout, one entry at a time. Received October 12th, 1997. Name, Shadow. Condition: blind left eye malnourished. Notes will not eat from hand, yet needs time. Before we get to what I'm about to share and what it revealed about the people I had trusted most inside that sanctuary, I want to ask you something. If you slowly realized that someone close to you had been quietly working against everything you'd built, would you confront them immediately, or would you wait and let the evidence speak for itself? Received March 3rd, 2000. Name Bella. Condition 3 legs. Heartworm positive. Note: surgery scheduled. Foster family interested if recovery successful. Every animal, every name, every date. Her careful notes about what each one needed, what they ate, whether they were frightened or trusting. I read for hours. I did not eat. I did not sleep well. I just read. On the second day, I came to the final entry written 3 days before she died. Scout ate well today. Vincent looks tired. Tell him the bench by the oak tree needs fixing. He'll know which one. I read it 3 times. The bench by the oak tree. I knew which one. The bench where she used to sit with her coffee and her notebook, writing about the animals we had saved. She had known she was dying. She had known I would be worn down. She had left me a note about something that needed fixing, something small and manageable, as if she understood I would need tasks I could finish when everything else felt beyond reach. I set the notebook down. Scout rested his head on my lap. I sat like that until dark. There is a difference between being strong and being unable to break. Strength is choosing when to stand. And for 2 days in that truck, I chose to stop standing, to sit with my dog and my dead wife's handwriting, and let myself understand that everything I had built was gone, and I did not know whether I could build it again. This was the first time I let myself collapse. Not plan, not document. Just break. The knock came at 8 o'clock on the second night. I looked up. A woman stood outside the truck window, holding a thermos and a bag. Dark hair, blue jacket. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. I rolled down the window. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "My name is Petra Aldridge. Norbert called me. I brought soup." "It's tomato. I didn't know if you'd eaten." Petra Aldridge, 31 years old, a non-profit attorney with dark hair and a blue jacket, standing there holding soup. The girl I had found 18 years ago when she was 13 and sleeping in the kennel, now showing up at exactly the moment I needed someone. Petra Aldridge. "You were 13, I said. "I was," she said. "You fed me for 3 weeks and called social services and never asked for anything. Now, I'm a nonprofit attorney, and I think you need one." Scout lifted his head and sniffed her hand through the window. He didn't growl, just one sniff, then he settled back down. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. I unlocked the door. She climbed into the back seat with the thermos and the bread bag. She poured soup into the thermos cap and passed it to me. It was hot. It tasted like the first meal that had meant anything in 2 days. When someone brings you food after you haven't eaten for 2 days. When they knock on a truck window in the dark and hand you soup without asking why you need it. When they remember being fed 18 years ago and come back to return what they were given. That is not charity. That is the covenant Nadine believed in and built her whole life around. Norbert told me what happened. Petra said the eviction, the list with your dog's name on it, the financial records Claudette had uncovered. He thought you might need legal help. "I don't have money for a lawyer," I said. "I'm not here for money," Petra said. "I'm here because you kept me alive when I was 13 and had nowhere to go, and because your wife wrote my name into a legal document when I was that age." I looked at her. "What document?" I asked. "The Nadine Holt Animal Preservation Trust," Petra said. "Your wife established it in 2018. There's a clause that activates if the sanctuary is converted to commercial use or stops honoring its mission. When that happens, all ownership rights revert to the trust." "I know about the trust," I said. The lawyer read it at the will hearing. "Did he read the part about the designated trust attorney?" Petra asked. I shook my head. "Your wife wrote my name into it," Petra said. "When I was 27 years old, a child she had never met. She had only heard about me from you once on a night when you came home and told her about a girl you found sleeping in the kennel because she had nowhere else to go." I stared at her. "Nadine remembered," I said. "She remembered," Petra confirmed, "and she planned ahead. That was the thing about Nadine, she always saw further than the rest of us. Petra stayed in that truck for 2 hours. She told me about the trust. She told me Nadine had written her name into it when Petra was 13 years old. A child, Nadine had never met a child whose name she had only heard from me once. Nadine had remembered. Nadine had planned ahead. The next morning, we would drive to her office in Seattle, and she would open the file that would change everything the trust clause Nadine had hidden in plain sight, waiting for exactly the kind of betrayal that had just occurred. The next morning in Petra's office in Seattle, she opened Nadine's will file on her laptop and read aloud the clause that would change everything. In the event that Callaway Ridge Animal Sanctuary is converted to commercial use or animal capacity falls below 60% of established baseline, all ownership rights shall revert automatically to the Nadine Callaway Animal Preservation Trust. She paused, scrolling through the legal language. The designated trust attorney is Petra Aldridge upon reaching legal age of practice. Another pause. She looked at me across the desk. She wrote my name in here when I was 13. Petra said. She had never met me. She just knew. I was sitting in the chair across from her desk. Scout was on the floor beside me. We had driven to Seattle that morning, parked in the garage beneath her building, and taken the elevator to the 3rd floor. What does this mean, legally? I asked. It means if Derek converts the sanctuary to commercial use, or if the animal capacity drops below 60% of what Nadine established as baseline, the trust activates automatically, Petra said. No court approval needed, no probate. It just reverts. And as designated trust attorney, I have authority to enforce it. Has he converted it yet? I asked. Not yet, Petra said. But has he reduced capacity below 60%? She looked at her screen, then back at me. That's what we need to find out. Norbert knocked on the door 20 minutes later. He came in carrying a folder. Derek signed a capacity reduction plan last month, Norbert said, setting the folder on Petra's desk. Budget justification filed with the state for nonprofit operational restructuring. He brought the operation down to 58% of established baseline. I stared at the document. Derek's signature at the bottom, dated 4 weeks ago. He triggered the trust himself, I said. Without knowing it, Petra confirmed. Yes. When does incompetence become justice? When the man trying to dismantle your life's work signs the very document that strips his own authority. When greed goes so blind, it can no longer read the clauses written by the woman he claimed to love. When the trap closes not because you sprung it, but because he walked straight into it trying to cut costs on the animals his mother died protecting. Nadine always saw further. She had built the trap. She had set the threshold at exactly 60%, and Derek had walked right into it, trying to save money, never having read the legal documents his mother filed years before his greed took hold. What do we do now? I asked. We file for enforcement, Petra said. But that takes time, weeks, maybe months. They'll fight it. They'll claim the capacity reduction was temporary, that they're rebuilding the population, that the trust clause doesn't apply. So we need to force their hand, Norbert said. Petra nodded. I'm filing an emergency application to freeze all sanctuary donation funds while the investigation is ongoing. Claudette's financial statements are enough for prima facie evidence of elder financial abuse. If the judge approves the freeze, Derek and Renee can't touch the money that pushes them to move faster than they'd like. Fast enough to make mistakes, I asked. Fast enough to make mistakes, Petra said. 2 days later, the judge approved the freeze. Derek received the notification by email at 4 p.m. I know because Norbert had been monitoring his accounts the way he had been tracking everything for 3 months. Renee called Holden within the hour. Norbert played me the recording later. He had been keeping watch on calls made from the sanctuary's main office line, the one Renee used for business, the one registered under the sanctuary's non-profit account. Washington's one-party consent law applied Vincent as the line's account holder, had authorized the monitoring in writing when Norbert asked. It wasn't wiretapping. It was documentation, essential evidence. The gala is in 11 days, Renee said on the recording, her voice tight with controlled anger. If we announce the deal publicly before the investigation concludes, it's harder to legally reverse. We need to move faster. Are you sure? Holden's voice asked. We announce at the gala, Renee said. As planned. 11 days, Holden confirmed. Then we announce at the gala, as planned. I sat in Petra's office listening to the recording. 11 days, I said. They think that's enough time. They think they're ahead of us. They don't know we have the trust trigger, Petra said. They don't know Claudette documented everything. They don't know Norbert has been recording them for weeks. And they don't know Nadia, Norbert added. I looked at him. What about Nadia? I asked. She's been volunteering at the gala venue, Norbert said. setting up AV equipment. The venue coordinator had put out a call for volunteers from local nonprofits. Nadia signed up. She'd been inside twice already that week. They had 11 days, and they figured that was plenty of time to announce a deal at a gala before any investigation could catch up, not knowing that a 17-year-old girl had already walked through that venue twice with her phone and a quiet, unshakable resolve to capture everything they were trying to bury. "What's she setting up?" I asked. "Whatever we need her to set up," Norbert said. Petra pulled up a new file on her laptop. Inside were photos Nadia had sent over. The gala ballroom, the main screen, the AV control booth, the evening schedule. "Holden is speaking at 7:30. Petra said, introducing the Silver Pines partnership. Derek and Renee will be on stage with him. 300 donors in the audience, 300 witnesses," I said. "Exactly." Petra said we had the trust, we had the trigger, we had the evidence. What we needed now was a room full of people who would watch it unfold in real time. Holden Farwell was going to hand us exactly that. Over the coming week, I would stay at Petra's house, working through the final confrontation, while Norbert, Claudette, Dr. Kepler, and Nadia each moved their pieces into position for the night. Everything would either fall apart or be rescued. Petra's guest room smelled of lavender and old books. Scout slept on a folded quilt beside the bed, his breathing steadier than it had been in days. I stayed at her house in Seattle for the week, leading up to the gala. She had offered on the second night when we were sitting in my truck eating soup, and I had said yes because I had nowhere else to be, and because sleeping in a guest bed felt less like charity when it came from someone whose life I had once helped pull back from the edge. Every evening, we sat at her kitchen table, files spread across the worn oak surface, her laptop open, coffee and chipped mugs, planning. On the fourth night past midnight, Petra looked up from the evidence files and asked the question I had been sidestepping. "Why did you wait?" she said. "You could have invoked the trust clause months ago. Nadine gave you that protection in 2018. You've known about it since the will reading." I looked at the photo she had printed and set on the table. Derek and me at the sanctuary's opening in 1996. 27 years younger, his arm around my shoulders. Both of us smiling at something Nadine had said just off camera. "I wanted to see if he would choose differently," I said. "Extameswas, wali." Rain tapped against the window. Scout's paws twitched in his sleep, chasing something in a dream. Nadine would have wanted me to give him every chance, I continued. She loved him. Even when she wrote that trust clause, even when she planned for this exact betrayal, she still loved him. She still hoped he'd put the sanctuary ahead of the money. Petra was quiet for a long stretch. "So, you waited," she said, "and gathered evidence and gave him chances." "I gave him chances," I confirmed. Each time he made a choice, I waited to see whether the next one would be different. I kept on hoping. And now I'm done hoping, I said. Petra's kitchen at 1 a.m. Coffee gone cold in chipped mugs. Scout's paws twitching through some dream chase rain. On the window like fingers drumming. My hands flat on the table beside Nadine's handwritten, will dated 2018, 5 years before she died. Every word in her precise architect's lettering. In the event my son demonstrates unwillingness to honor this sanctuary's mission. She knew. Even then she knew. On the 7th day, I made phone calls. 12 former volunteers who had left the sanctuary over the past 2 years when Derek cut their positions. 3 allied animal shelters that had taken transfers from us before. I asked them all the same question. Could they take animals on short notice, elderly and sick ones needing specialized care? Every one of them said yes. 3 nights before the gala, at 2 a.m, I drove to the sanctuary. I had called the volunteers earlier that day, told them to meet me at the back gate. Bring vans, bring carriers, stay quiet. I still had the back gate code, the one Nadine and I had set in 1996. Derek had never changed it. He had never thought to ask what codes existed beyond the main entrance. I parked 3 blocks away and walked to the gate with Scout. The vans were already there, engines off waiting in the dark. I entered the code. The gate came open with a soft click. We moved without a sound. 12 volunteers, 4 shelter directors, 23 animals. On the remove list, Bella, the blind shepherd, Samson the 3-legged retriever, Duke the 16-year-old cat. Every name I had read on that clipboard, we found their kennels and carried them out. Scout walked beside me the whole time, as though he understood what we were doing and why it had to be done in darkness. 3 hours no talking, just the quiet efficiency of people who knew how to handle frightened animals, and move fast. By 5 in the morning, all 23 were gone, transferred to 4 different shelters across Washington, each one set up to care for elderly animals with medical needs. I stood in the empty kennels afterward, just me and Scout and the silence. Scout's old pen with the carved name plaque Nadine had made the water bowl still half full. I felt no triumph or vindication, only the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had spent months hoping he was wrong about his own son, and the quiet relief of knowing 23 animals would wake up tomorrow somewhere no one had a remove list. Renee arrived at 7. Norbert was parked across the street. He had been watching the sanctuary since 6 o'clock, waiting for her morning inspection. He sent me the video later that day. Renee walking through the kennels, stopping, looking around, her face shifting as she grasped what she was seeing. Not sick animals, not old dogs, nothing. Empty cages, empty water, bowls empty. I watched the video once, her face the rage, the helplessness. The moment she understood that someone had moved faster than she had planned, that someone had taken the animals she intended to kill and placed them somewhere beyond her reach. Then I deleted the file. I did not save it. I did not need it. The animals were safe. That was all that mattered. Renee could rage at empty kennels all she wanted. She could call Derek. She could call Holden. She could try to trace where the animals had gone, but they were gone. And I was the only one who knew where. That evening back at Petra's house, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text was 3 words. Saturday the gala. Bring everything. I stared at the screen. Then a second message came through. A photo. Renee and Holden outside a downtown office building, her hand on his arm. Both of them laughing. The timestamp read yesterday 4 in the afternoon. A third message. She doesn't know I was there. We need to talk before Saturday. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., Westlake Plaza. The sender's name sat at the top of the thread. Callum Breck, the same reporter who had written the hit piece about me 6 weeks ago. The article with my photo on the front page painting me as a founder, resisting change while the facility crumbled. Now he was sending me photos of Renee and Holden. Now he wanted to meet. I showed the messages to Petra. He switched sides, she said. Or he's setting a trap, I said. Only one way to find out, Petra said. I looked at the photo again. Renee's hand on Holden's arm, both of them laughing. The gala was 2 days away. We had the trust. We had the trigger. We had the evidence. We had the animals safe. What we needed now was someone with a camera and a newspaper who would tell the truth. Callum Breck was offering exactly that. The USB drive sat between 2 cold coffees, black plastic no bigger than my thumb, labeled in Sharpie Renee Callaway Unfiltered. Callum Breck waited at a corner table in the Westlake Plaza coffee shop, looking like he hadn't slept since filing that hit piece 6 weeks ago. Dark circles under his eyes, rumpled clothes. 2 coffees already ordered, both gone cold, while he sat there checking his watch. I pulled out the chair across from him. Scout settled at my feet. "Thank you for coming," Callum said. I didn't say anything. I just looked at the USB drive. "I've been writing the wrong story," Callum said. "She played me, and I let her because it was easy. She gave me quotes. She gave me access. She made it sound like she was the concerned family member trying to rescue a struggling sanctuary from a stubborn old man who couldn't let go. And you believed her," I said. "I didn't verify," Callum said. "That's the part I can't fix. I should have called you. I should have checked the financials. I should have asked why all the veteran staff had quit in the last 2 years. I didn't. I just wrote what she told me to write." He slid the USB drive across the table. "This is everything she told me, off the record." He said recordings from our meetings, notes she passed along that she said weren't for publication. She called the animals expensive dead weight. She said Derek needed to finally act like a CEO instead of his mother's son. She told him the removal list was resource optimization. I picked up the drive. "Why are you handing this to me?" I asked. "Because I watched her live stream this morning," Callum said, "and I saw the comments and realized I'd spent months writing propaganda for someone who was planning to put down 23 animals for budget reasons." He looked at me directly for the first time. "What do you want the public to know before Saturday?" he asked. "Tell them what the sanctuary was built for," I said. "Not what they wanted to turn it into." I walked out of the coffee shop with the USB drive in my coat pocket. At 11:30 that morning, Renee launched a live stream from the sanctuary. Petra called me. "You need to see this." I watched on her laptop. Renee, standing in the empty kennel's phone, held up addressing the camera with practiced concern. My husband's father has stolen 23 animals that belong to this sanctuary. She said to 12,000 viewers, animals that were under our care that we were responsible for taking in the middle of the night without authorization. The viewer count climbed, 12,000, 13,000. Then the comments began. Nadia Fowler posted a video clip. Renee's voice. Dead animals don't need food. Derek, they need disposal. Claudette Gideon posted a PDF bank statements. $340,000 highlighted in yellow. Derek Calloway's name on every transfer. I watched Renee's live stream on Petra's laptop, volume muted, her mouth moved. Accusations, justifications, victim posture. But all I could see was the empty kennel behind her, the one with Scout's old name plaque that Nadine had carved in 2018. I didn't feel anger. I felt the quiet finality of watching someone dismantle themselves on camera, while 12,000 strangers bore witness. The viewer count began to fall. 12,000, 11,000, 8,000, Renee noticed. She glanced at her phone screen confused. She started reading the comments aloud, trying to answer them, but that only pushed more people away. The live stream ended at 15 minutes. 4,000 viewers remained. Callum's article went live at 6 that evening. The headline, The Real Story of Callaway Ridge, How a Son Betrayed His Mother's Legacy. Petra read it aloud from her phone while I sat at her kitchen table. Every document we had given him, every video Nadia had recorded, every bank statement Claudette had provided, the destruction contract, the removal list photos of the animals Renee had wanted gone. He didn't hold back. Petra said every document, every video, every dollar. The article had embedded media. You could click and watch Renee saying dead animals don't need food in the same offhand tone you'd use to order a coffee. You could download the bank statements laying out the embezzled funds. You could see the removal list with 23 names written in red marker. By 8 o'clock, #SaveCallaway. M. Ridge was trending. At 10, Petra showed me her phone. Number 7 in Washington, number 43 nationally. Hundreds of comments from strangers defending Nadine's vision, condemning the embezzlement, offering donations to help me rebuild. People I had never met fighting for a place they had never seen. I thought, Nadine, they heard you. Across 27 years and one viral article, they finally heard what you were trying to build. At 11 that night, my phone rang. Derek's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. I stared at it through 3 rings, then I picked up. "Oh, hello," I said. Silence, just breathing on the other end. Then Derek's voice, quieter than I had heard it in years. "Dad, not Vincent, not father, just Dad." 5 seconds of silence. I waited. I did not fill the gap. I gave him the space to say whatever came next. The call ended. No explanation, no apology, no question, just that one word hanging in the air, and the dial tone that followed. I set the phone down on the kitchen table. Petra was watching me from across the room. "What did he say?" she asked. "Dad," I said. "Just that." "What does that mean?" "I don't know," I said. But I knew what it meant. It meant something had cracked. It meant the article had reached him. It meant seeing his mother's name in a headline about betrayal had broken through whatever wall Renee had built between us. It meant he wasn't ready to apologize. But he wasn't ready to keep fighting either. The gala was less than 2 days away. Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. Derek had called. He had said one word, then hung up. And I had no idea whether that word meant he was coming to the gala to stand beside Renee and Holden, or whether it meant he was finally choosing differently. Nadia's hands didn't shake when she plugged the USB into the venue's central AV system 2 hours before 300 people would arrive, expecting champagne and philanthropy. I watched from the truck as she walked out of the Lakeview Convention Center at 4:15, her borrowed technical volunteer uniform already stripped off and stuffed into her backpack. She'd borrowed it from a friend who actually worked venue setup. Same height, same build, same confident stride that made you assume she belonged anywhere she walked. She climbed into the passenger seat. It's done 45 minutes after they start. No one can stop it. You're sure about the timing. The system runs on military precision. She pulled out her phone and showed me the screenshot she'd taken of the AV interface. 6:45 p.m. exactly. Autoplay trigger, priority override. Even if someone unplugs the laptop, the backup system kicks in. Scout shifted in the back seat, his head resting against my shoulder. I'd brought him because I couldn't leave him at the house. Not tonight. Not when everything Derek had built was about to come apart in front of 300 witnesses. The tech asked what was on the drive. Nadia said Blake Morris in mid-30s looked confident. I told him it was a backup presentation in case Holden's laptop failed. He believed you. He thanked me for being thorough. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. People see what they expect to see. A 17-year-old volunteer in a tech uniform must be doing her job. I dropped her at Petra's office downtown. She had homework. She said AP chemistry and an essay on civic responsibility that suddenly felt less theoretical than it had 3 weeks ago. 2 hours later, I sat in the same parking spot across from the Lakeview Convention Center, watching luxury cars arrive in a steady stream. 6 o'clock exactly. The first guests stepped through the glass doors in formal wear that cost more than I'd spent on veterinary supplies in a month. Derek arrived at 6:10 in a town car, Renee beside him, in emerald silk. He looked calm, happy even. A man about to close the deal of his life, about to transform a struggling animal sanctuary into a luxury pet resort, charging $3,200 per week, while the animals I'd cared for across 40 years disappeared into whatever hole he'd dug for them. Nadine used to say that Derek's mistake wasn't greed. It was that he believed money could sanitize cruelty, that if you charged enough, called it premium service, hired the right PR firm, no one would notice you'd built your empire on the backs of creatures that couldn't defend themselves. She'd written it in her notebook 2 months before she died, in handwriting that grew shakier with every page. The price doesn't matter. Cruelty in a tailored suit is still cruelty. I thought about that now, watching Derek shake hands with donors in the lobby. $3,200 per week. A resort courtyard with a heated lap pool, pet spa with temperature-regulated suites, concierge veterinary care, all on land where Nadine had built functional kennels, because the animals needed shelter, not luxury. Where I had repaired the fence with my own hands because the budget didn't stretch to contractors, and Nadine had stood beside me holding the posts steady while I hammered. Holden Farwell arrived at 6:20 carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my truck. He went straight inside, no hesitation. A man who'd made his career selling beautiful lies to people who wanted to believe them. I checked my watch. 6:30. 15 minutes until the presentation started. 45 minutes until the truth played on a screen too large for anyone to look away from. Scout whined softly. I scratched behind his ears, felt his heartbeat steady against my palm. Soon, I told him. Soon, everyone knows what they did to her. At 6:40, I spotted Holden through the convention center's second-floor windows. He stood at a podium before a massive screen displaying 3D renders of Silver Pine's luxury pet resort. Gleaming buildings, manicured grounds, happy dogs running through professionally landscaped gardens that bore no resemblance to the mud and reality of actual animal care. Derek sat beside him on the stage-tailored suit, practiced smile. Renee sat in the front row, nodding at every word, as though she had choreographed the whole evening herself. Holden's voice filtered through the glass, muffled but clear enough, something about transforming premium pet care into an experience that honors both the animals and the families who place their trust in us. I thought about Nadine's charcoal anniversary coat, the one I was wearing tonight, because she'd had it on at the 2018 gala, when Derek had stood before those donors and sworn he'd expand the sanctuary's medical wing. The wing he'd gutted 6 months later to finance his downtown condo. The coat still held a faint trace of her perfume jasmine, and something underneath it I could never quite put a name to. She'd whispered to me that night, standing in this same parking lot before we stepped inside. When this is over, remind Derek what he promised. Don't let him forget. I'd failed her then. Let him smooth things over with talk of cash flow and strategic priorities and long-term sustainability. Let him turn Nadine's medical wing into a line item he quietly erased. Not tonight. 6:43. Holden still mid-sentence about innovation and heritage and transformation. Through the window, I watched Callum Breck checking his watch every 30 seconds, his face pale, even from where I stood. 2 minutes left. I reached for the door handle, ready to walk inside. To be there when the screen went dark and the evidence began playing. To see Derek's face when 300 donors watched Renee talk about dead animals not needing food. When they saw the remove list and the demolition contract and the medication logs that proved what the two of them had done to Nadine. But my hand stopped on the handle. The timer didn't care whether I was in that room. The evidence didn't need me to press play. The truth was coming out in exactly 120 seconds, whether I watched it happen or sat here in Nadine's coat with Scout's head resting on my shoulder. I'd spent 6 weeks pulling that proof together, but it didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to every person about to see it. I let go of the handle. 6:44, 1 minute. Holden gestured at the renderings, talking about premium experiences and legacy projects. Derek smiled. Renee nodded. The clock reached 6:45. Inside the screen went black. It cut Holden off mid-word about transformation. For 5 full seconds, 300 people sat in puzzled silence. Then the projector blazed back to life. Not Silver Pines. A timestamp from 3 weeks ago. And Renee's face saying words she'd been certain no one would ever hear. The dead animals don't need food, Derek. They need disposal. The old ones are running us $4,000 a month. Her voice filled the ballroom, through speakers built for inspirational speeches and donor appeals. Crystal clear. Undeniable. Renee on screen in the sanctuary office standing beside Derek's desk, the camera catching both her face and the documents she held. I was still in the truck when the first murmur moved through the crowd, visible through the second-floor windows. Heads turned toward Renee in the front row. I saw her rise to her feet, mouth moving, probably telling Derek to do something. Turn it off. Make it stop. But Nadia had built the trigger with a priority override. No one could stop it. The screen shifted to a document, a demolition contract. Renee's signature at the bottom, dated 2 months ago, authorizing the destruction of the sanctuary's kennels and medical wing. The camera zoomed in on her name, Renee Voss Calloway, November 15th, 2022, making certain every person in that room could read it. Then the remove list. I'd seen it before in Norbert's photographs, but watching it displayed 15 feet high on a luxury ballroom screen landed differently. 23 animal names written in red marker, Scout at the top. Then Bella Sampson, the 3-legged cat Nadine had bottle-fed in 2017, the blind horse she'd rescued in 2016. Each name 2 inches tall, each one an animal Renee had decided was too costly to keep alive. The list held on screen for 12 seconds. Long enough for 300 people to read every name. Long enough for them to understand this wasn't abstract business strategy or cost optimization. These were living things with names, things Nadine had loved, things Renee had marked for death because they ate too much and drew too little donor interest. 12 seconds in a ballroom where champagne cost $55 a glass. The screen shifted again. Bank statements, yellow highlighter tracing transfers $340,000 total. Derek Calloway's name on every authorization. The Vivian Memorial Fund, the one established after the donor's passing, had left everything to the sanctuary. $127,000 showed withdrawn, the account closed, the money redirected to accounts that had nothing to do with animals. I climbed out of the truck, left it running. Scout jumped down beside me, stayed close against my leg as we crossed the street toward the convention center's back entrance. Inside the ballroom, audio began playing over the financial documents, Derek's voice. I recognized it even through the door as I moved down the back hallway. My son's voice recorded in his office 3 weeks ago, when he believed only Renee was listening. Kill the old ones first, the sick ones, anything costing more than $200 a month. No one's watching that closely. Not embezzlement buried in paperwork someone else had signed. Not plausible deniability. His voice. His words. His order to destroy animals his mother had given 40 years to protect. I reached the ballroom's back doors. Through the window, complete silence. 300 people frozen. Holden still at the podium, mouth half open, stammering something about technical difficulties that no one was hearing. Derek on stage beside him, his face drained of color under the lights. Renee standing in the front row, her hand on his arm, whispering something urgent. Callum Breck sat 3 rows back, just watching. His expression gave nothing away, but his hands rested folded in his lap, perfectly still. The recording played again, Derek's voice. No one's watching that closely. I pushed open the doors. Scout and I walked down the center aisle. My boots, his nails on the polished floor, the only sounds in a room built for 300 voices. Every head swung from the screen to us. Derek spotted me first. His mouth moved, shaped the word, Dad. But nothing came out. I was wearing Nadine's charcoal anniversary coat, the one she'd had on at the 2018 gala, the night Derek stood before these same donors and promised to expand the medical wing. The coat still carried the scent of jasmine and the lie he'd told her that evening. The trust document she'd signed that same year, the one shielding the sanctuary from anyone who refused to honor its mission, sat folded in the inside pocket, notarized, legal, unassailable. The center aisle was 60 feet long. I counted my steps, 15, 16, 17. Scouts stayed beside me, steady like we'd walked into hard places before. I'd fought fires for the city from 1991 to 2019, pulled 11 people from burning buildings, lost 2, walked into rooms where the ceiling was coming down and the floor was giving way, and every nerve in my body screamed to turn back. I never once felt fear like this. Not the adrenaline kind, not the fear for your body. This was the cold, settled certainty of a father who's about to bring his son's world down in front of everyone who matters and who knows it's the only right thing left to do. In fires, you save people. Here I was destroying one, my own son. And unlike fires, there was nothing waiting on the other side of this. No rescue, only accountability. 30 steps, 40. The screen behind the stage still showed evidence Nadine's handwritten will, now the 2018 document bearing the same protection clause as the trust, her signature at the bottom, in the unsteady handwriting she'd developed in her final year. 50 steps. I reached the stage, climbed the 3 stairs. Derek stood 5 feet away, frozen, his tailored suit, suddenly looking like a costume on a man whose performance had just ended. I drew the trust document from my coat pocket, unfolded. It held it up where Derek could see Nadine's signature, where everyone could see it. Her name was Nadine, I said loud enough to carry across the whole room. This was her sanctuary. You're done. Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Behind him, the screen showed the trust's key clause blown up 15 feet high. In the event of unwillingness to honor this sanctuary's mission, his mouth kept moving silent, like language had stopped working for him. I held the document higher, 300 people watching. Renee sank into her chair. Holden backed away from the podium. Derek finally found his voice. Dad. I looked past him to the 3rd row, to the attorney who had notarized this document alongside Nadine in 2018, who had watched my wife sign her protection into law, while Derek stood there smiling and making promises he never planned to keep. Petra Aldridge took the microphone from my hand and turned to face 300 people, who, 30 seconds ago, had been expecting a resort pitch and who now sat in stunned silence, staring at evidence of embezzlement and animal cruelty. I am the designated trustee for the Nadine Calloway Animal Preservation Trust, established in 2018. Her voice carried across the ballroom, composed and certain. Under the trust terms and Washington law, this sanctuary cannot be converted to commercial use. 2018, 5 years before Nadine died. Before Derek married Renee, before any of this began, Nadine had seen it coming. She had chosen Petra, the nonprofit attorney who actually cared about the animals, to be the failsafe. Petra had known about the trust for years, holding her position, until the moment I finally moved. Derek Calloway's actions that night triggered the incapacity clause his mother had written into the trust. Petra went on, all ownership and control of the sanctuary property reverted to trust protection, effective immediately. The sale to Holden Farwell cannot legally proceed. In the 4th row, Henry Caldwell, corporate attorney, late 50s, $800 an hour to inform wealthy clients when their schemes were finished, leaned toward Holden and whispered something. He shook his head, mouthed one word, done. The property was untouchable. Not because Derek had a change of heart, because Nadine had written protection into law 5 years ago, and I'd spent 6 weeks assembling the proof that set it in motion. Derek stood on that stage 5 feet from me, eyes fixed on Scout, the 11-year-old dog with arthritis and cloudy eyes. First on the removal list. The animal Renee had wanted gone first. Scout looked back at him. No growl, no fear. Just an old dog who had survived because his owner had gathered evidence instead of lashing out in anger. Derek's mouth opened as if he were about to speak. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know. She made me. Nothing came out. What words even exist for a moment like that? For standing before 300 witnesses, your own father, the dog you had marked for death, while your recorded voice ordering executions plays out on a screen. What do you say when the mother you claim to honor built a legal wall against you 5 years before she passed? Because she knew. She had always known you'd do exactly this. Derek closed his mouth. The silence pressed down like something solid. I turned and walked off the stage. Scout followed at my heel. We moved toward the back exit. In the corridor outside the ballroom, I found Renee. She stood against the wall phone and hand eyes fixed on Holden near the parking lot doors. Holden looked at her the way you'd look at a stranger across a conference table, polite professional 1,000 miles away. "This is no longer my problem, Renee," he said, his voice flat. "My lawyers will be in touch about recovering the deposit." "Holden, we can still—" "No." He turned away. "We can't. Good night." He walked out, didn't rush, just crossed the lot like a man leaving a failed meeting, climbed into his luxury sedan, and was gone. Total abandonment carried out with corporate precision. Renee watched his taillights fade into the dark. Her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and didn't answer. It kept going. I walked past her toward the exit. Scout's nails clicked against the tile. She looked up at me, maybe hoping for help, maybe for some acknowledgement, maybe just to see whether I felt satisfied. I held her gaze for 1 second, then kept walking. Outside, the air was cold. January cold that cut through Nadine's charcoal anniversary coat and reminded me she wasn't here to see this, that she had built the protection and died before watching it work. Petra was waiting beside my truck. She had slipped out a side door while the crowd was still taking it in. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, wasn't sure if it was true. "What about Derek?" I looked back at the venue entrance. Inside, my son was standing in the wreckage of everything he'd constructed, everything he'd plotted, everything he'd believed he could walk away with. "I don't know," I said. Inside, Renee stood alone in the corridor, her phone vibrating without pause. Call from David Hutchkins. Ignored. Call from Rebecca Yates. Ignored. Hutchkins again. Ignored. A text lit up the screen. "You stole from a cancer memorial fund. Call me now." Call from Derek. She stared at his name through 5 rings and let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. The phone went quiet for 8 seconds, then started up again. Callum Breck appeared in the ballroom doorway behind her, looked at her for 3 seconds, then looked away. Nothing left worth saying. He walked past without a word. Renee's hand dropped to her side phone, still ringing. She had spent 15 years constructing a life that looked like something successful marriage executive image, a recognized face at every gala and fundraiser and chamber event. The kind of life where people sought out your name and your opinion. 45 minutes of evidence on a screen, and she had become what she'd always been, most afraid of nothing that mattered to anyone. 7 investor calls in 4 minutes. 0 answers, 0 plans, 0 allies. I stood by my truck, watching through the glass. Petra beside me, Scout between us. "He's coming out," Petra said quietly. Derek came through the entrance doors, spotted us across the lot, and stopped under the lights. For 5 seconds, he just stood there. Then he started walking toward us, not rushing, not faltering, just walking like a man who had reached a decision but wasn't sure he had arrived in time. Derek stopped 10 feet from my truck, looked at me, opened his mouth, closed it, turned around, and walked back inside. I didn't call after him. I wouldn't have known what to say if I had. Monday morning, 72 hours on Petra's office phone rang 4 times. Washington DOJ at 9, IRS at 10:15, Vet Medical Board at 11. A preliminary inquiry from FBI Financial Crimes at noon. Not a full investigation yet, just a request for documentation. Petra said that was how it always began. A request, then a review, then an investigation, months out, maybe a year. But it had started. The DOJ call ran 8 minutes. Elder financial abuse and charity fraud. The agent requested copies of the trust documents, Nadine's medical records from her final year, and bank statements showing the memorial fund withdrawals. The IRS call ran 12. Claudette had sent her file on Saturday, 3 years of fictitious invoices and embezzlement documented and delivered. They wanted to interview her in person, wanted Derek's tax returns, wanted to know whether Nadine had filed any complaints before she died. The Vet Medical Board call was shorter. Dr. Kepler had submitted his medication tampering evidence Saturday night, complete with pharmacy records and Nadine's symptom timeline. They were opening a criminal investigation, not just a professional review. Someone could go to prison for what had been done to her. The FBI call concerned Holden conspiracy to commit fraud. They had received documentation of his role in the Silver Pine scheme Monday morning, property appraisals he'd commissioned, before Derek had any legal authority to sell investor packets promising returns on land. He didn't yet own emails coordinating the gala presentation before the sale was finalized. 4 agencies, 3 hours. Coordinated evidence delivery. Claudette to the IRS on Saturday. Dr. Kepler to the vet board on Saturday. Petra forwarding everything to Washington DOJ on Sunday. Holden's documentation to FBI financial crimes Monday morning. Not separate organic complaints. A legal strategy carried out by people who had watched my wife get torn apart and held their positions until the right moment. How long before it moved? Petra shook her head. Months, maybe a year, but it's in motion now, and they can't stop it. Derek lost everything in sequence like dominoes falling. Saturday, 10 CFO position gone. Security walked him out of the building. 15 minutes to gather personal items. Badge deactivated at 3 p.m. Tuesday, Renee filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences and reputational harm. The attached asset division claimed the shared bank account, $43,000 transferred to her sole account before end of business. The car registered in her name. The downtown apartment lease in her name. Wednesday, corporate credit cards canceled, professional references withdrawn. 3 former colleagues left his recommendation requests unanswered. Thursday, the apartment locks were changed. Renee's attorney sent notice 72 hours to collect his belongings. Supervised only, 1 week, 7 days to lose everything. He had spent 3 years building it. Everything he'd chosen when he chose her over his father. Everything he'd preserved by letting his mother die alone and drawing up plans to kill 23 animals whose only offense was costing too much to keep. No dramatic confrontations, no shouting or thrown objects or scenes in public, just systematic institutional consequences delivered by email and legal notice. I learned most of it from Petra, who heard it from Callum, who was apparently still following the story, even after he had walked away from Renee in the venue corridor. Sometimes consequences become news, whether you want them to or not. Friday afternoon, 1 week after the gala, Norbert called. "Your son has been sitting outside the sanctuary for 3 hours," he said. "Borrowed car engine off, just staring at the gate." I was at Petra's house. She had offered me her guest room after the gala, said Scout and I shouldn't be alone in that rental house with nothing but silence and the wait. I'd taken her up on it because she was right. "Is he trying to get in?" I asked. "No, just sitting there looking at Nadine's sign." A pause. "Thought you should know. Thanks for telling me." I hung up, stood in Petra's kitchen holding my truck keys. 30 minutes to the sanctuary. 30 minutes to see my son sitting outside the gates he'd locked himself out of, staring at the hand-painted sign Nadine had made in 1996. Callaway Ridge Animal, sanctuary founded 1996, Nadine and Vincent. I pictured the drive, what I might say when I got there, whether he'd look at me or just stare through the windshield at a life he'd traded away for money, and a woman who'd left him the instant the cost ran too high. I thought about the burning apartment in 1994. 3-story walk-up. Everyone evacuated safely. Then a rookie ran back in for a photo album. Said his girlfriend's photos were inside. Irreplaceable. He'd only be a minute. We pulled his body out 2 hours later. The fire chief told me afterward, "You can't save what's already gone. You go back in, you just die trying." I'd seen it a dozen times across 28 years. Firefighters charging into collapsed structures for people already dead. Parents throwing themselves into rip currents after children who'd drowned 10 minutes before. People who simply couldn't accept that some things end. Some losses are permanent. Some people are gone, regardless of how desperately you want to pull them back. Derek had made his choices. Married Renee, knowing full well who she was. Helped her steal from his mother's sanctuary, plotted to destroy animals because their care cost too much. Stood on that stage at the gala, while the evidence played out and never uttered a word in his own defense. I couldn't spare him from the consequences of those choices. Couldn't drag him out of the burning structure he'd built around himself. Going there would wound us both and change nothing. I set the keys down. That night, I sat on Petra's back porch with Scout watching stars above Seattle. Petra brought out coffee settled beside me and didn't ask whether I'd phoned Derek or driven to the sanctuary. After 10 minutes of silence, she said, The animals return in 2 weeks. Norbert and Dr. Kepler are coordinating transport from the foster shelters. All 23 healthy and safe. I nodded, then finally asked the question I'd been sidestepping. They think he'll show up when they do. Petra didn't answer because neither of us knew. 2 weeks passed. Derek didn't show up. The animals came home instead. The sanctuary gates swung open the same way they had for 27 years. Metal scraping on gravel at the left side, catching on the post. And I drove my truck through them in mid-January, 2 weeks after being forced off the property Nadine had built with her own hands. Petra had completed every legal step for the trust ownership transfer. The property was protected now untouchable mine to steward under the terms Nadine had set down 5 years ago. I didn't expect what I found inside. 14 former staff and volunteers stood on either side of the entrance. 2 lines of 7, the gravel drive running between them. Dr. Kepler in his veterinary scrubs. 3 former kennel attendants in work jackets. Nadia standing with her camera at her side, not filming just there. Norbert wearing the faded Callaway Ridge 20th anniversary t-shirt from 2018. No applause, no cheers. Just people standing witness to my return. Petra sat in the passenger seat. "They wanted to be here," she said quietly as I slowed the truck. "I didn't ask them to come. They just turned up this morning. I drove past them at 5 miles per hour. Scout looked out the window at each face. None of them came forward. None waved or called out a welcome. They simply stood there while the truck rolled past. This is what victory actually looks like, I realized. Not triumph, not celebration, just people showing up. I parked near Nadine's garden corner. The wooden bench sat under the oak tree, its left leg tilted where the ground had settled unevenly. She'd noted it in her last notebooks before she died. "Bench by oak needs fixing." I got the wrench from the truck bed. Norbert walked over as I knelt beside it. "Animals arrived Thursday," he said. "All 23 accounted for. Healthy transport arranged, you coordinated that with Dr. Kepler and me. 4 allied shelters. None of them charge boarding fees." He paused. "People wanted to help. You just had to let them." Thursday morning, the convoy arrived. 4 vans from 4 different shelters pulling up to the kennel entrance in sequence as if they'd rehearsed it. I stood at the gate with Scout beside me, counting each elderly dog and cat as they were carried back to their original kennels. Bella 1, the arthritic shepherd mix Nadine had taken in during 2018. Samson 2, the blind terrier. Duke 3, the 3-legged cat who'd survived on bottle feeding. Scout sniffed each passing animal in greeting. Some remembered him. Some were too old or sick to care. All of them were alive. I counted to 23, not one lost during 3 weeks of foster care. Dr. Kepler reviewed health charts on a clipboard. "Not a single animal declined during placement," he said. "Your allied shelters took excellent care, better than excellent. They treated them like their own." Nadia filmed the returns on her phone, not for social media this time. When the last animal was settled, she sent the video to me with a note, "For the record, all 23 homes safe date stamped." I saved the file to the same folder that held Scout's eviction footage and Renee's contract signing. Evidence, proof. The kind of documentation that matters when people later ask whether any of this actually happened. That evening after the volunteers had gone and the kennels grown quiet and Scout was asleep in the corner of the office, I sat at Nadine's desk for the first time since the eviction. The chair still carried the scent of her lavender soap. 21 months after her death, the fragrance had soaked into the fabric, as if she'd only stepped outside for a moment and would be back shortly. I opened the drawer, searching for a 1/2-inch socket wrench to finish the bench repair. Instead, I found old invoices from 2022, supply receipts, veterinary records I'd filed and forgotten. Beneath them, folded in thirds, a sheet of sanctuary letterhead, covered in Nadine's precise architectural handwriting. I unfolded it slowly. Dated March 2022. 15 months before she died, a year before the betrayal began. If you're reading this, you found your way back. I knew you would. Not signed Love Nadine or Your Wife, or even N, just V, the initial she'd called me in private for 28 years. Shorthand for Vincent, for us, for everything we'd built together. She had known. 3 years before it happened, she'd known I'd be pushed out and have to fight my way back. I read it 5 times under the desk lamp, then pulled the drawer open wider, still looking for the 1/2-inch socket wrench. Behind the invoices where the first note had been tucked, I found a second folded paper. Same handwriting, different date. June 2023. the month she died. I unfolded it with hands that weren't quite steady. The first line read, "If Derek is reading this instead of you, then I was wrong about my son, and I'm sorry." The second line, "If you're reading this, Vincent, then you fought for it. Now I need you to do something harder." I stopped, stared at those words. Something harder. Fighting Derek had taken 6 weeks of evidence gathering and coordination. With allies I hadn't known, I had a public confrontation in front of 300 witnesses, and the willingness to end my son's life as he'd known it. What could possibly be harder than that? Scout shifted in his sleep across the room. Outside, the kennels were quiet. 23 animals safe in their beds. The sanctuary protected by law. The property untouchable. Everything I'd fought for secured. I looked back at the note. "Now I need you to do something harder." I kept reading. In Nadine's precise handwriting, 2 words, "Forgive him." I sat at her desk for 20 minutes, trying to work out whether a woman who'd been right about everything else could possibly be right about this too. The full line read, "Now I need you to do something harder. Forgive him. Not for Derek, for you, so you don't spend the rest of your life carrying what he did." I read it 5 times, set it down, picked it up again. Scout slept in the corner, unbothered by the weight of instructions from beyond the grave. I called Petra. "She planned all of it, didn't she?" Petra said, after I read the note aloud, not a question. The notes, the trust, everything, all the important parts. I said she couldn't plan what Derek would choose, only what would happen when he did. Silence on the line for a moment. "And now she's asking you to forgive him. For me, not for him." She was usually right about these things. Petra laughed soft and tired. "Usually. She never even met you," I said. "I know. I was 13 when you let me sleep in Kennel 3. Nadine was already sick by then, barely making it to the sanctuary, but she trusted your judgment." I remembered that morning 17 years ago. 6 a.m., opening the kennels for feeding rounds. Found Petra in Kennel 3 with a camping stove balanced on the concrete floor, scrambled eggs cooking in a dented pan. She wore a jacket 3 sizes too big, the sleeves covering her hands. She looked up when I opened the door, not frightened, not defiant, just tired in a way that 13-year-olds shouldn't be tired. "You eat yet?" I'd asked. She nodded at the eggs. "Kennel 3 is empty if you need somewhere quiet," I said and walked away. Didn't ask her name until day 5. Didn't ask why she'd run until she told me on day 43. Just let her stay. Nadine had said, "You did the right thing." Never questioned it. Never asked for details. Just trusted that if you'd sheltered someone, they needed sheltering. "What are you going to do with the sanctuary?" Petra asked, now pulling me back to the present. "What do you mean you're the steward under the trust? I'm the trustee, but it's yours to run." "It's the same thing I've always done," I said. "Keep it open. No abandoned soul turned away." "That's what I thought you'd say." 1 week later, I sat in Petra's Seattle office signing documents that made the sanctuary permanently protected. Irrevocable trust terms. No family member could ever sell the property. No one could alter its mission. No commercial development. No rezoning, ever. Petra witnessed as trustee Norbert, as operational witness Claudette, as financial witness. She'd driven up from Tacoma specifically for this. Said she wanted to see it made official. I signed the last page and set down the pen. Scout slept beneath my chair, still wearing the GPS collar from the eviction 3 weeks ago. I kept meaning to remove it. Kept not getting around to it. "How do you feel?" Norbert asked. "Like I fixed the bench," I said. He looked puzzled. I didn't elaborate. That was between me and Nadine. She'd written "bench by oak needs fixing" in her last notebook. I'd taken it for a simple maintenance note. But Nadine didn't waste words. The sanctuary's legal structure had needed fixing repairs to shield it from the people who'd tried to tear it apart. I'd just signed those repairs into permanence. The physical bench still needed tending to as well. I'd get to that tomorrow. Driving back to the sanctuary from Seattle, I stopped at Keswick Hardware off Highway 2, the kind of place that still had wooden floors and bins of loose screws sold by the pound. I found a 1/2-inch socket wrench replacement bolts for outdoor furniture in cedar stain, in the same color Nadine had used on the original bench in 1998. The cashier rang up my items Bonnie Pruitt according to her name tag. Mid-40s maybe, friendly smile. "What are you fixing today?" she asked. "A bench," I said. "Should have done it 2 years ago, maybe 3. "Well, better late than never." She bagged the supplies. "Building's harder than fixing anyway." I almost corrected her, told her I wasn't building, only fixing. But then I understood it was the same thing. You fix what's broken so it can keep doing what it was built for. The bench by the oak, the sanctuary's legal foundation. The mission Nadine had started in 1996. All of it needed tending sometimes. All of it was worth tending. The document in my truck was signed permanent irrevocable. The animals were home. The bench was next. I loaded the supplies in the truck bed beside Scout's water bowl and headed east on Highway 2. The sun was going down when I turned into the sanctuary driveway. Orange light cutting through the oak trees, throwing long shadows across the gravel. Scout was already asleep in the passenger seat. I'd fix the bench come morning first thing. I parked near the office, cut the engine, and sat in silence for 30 seconds, watching the light drain away. Then headlights appeared behind me. A car pulling through the gate slowly, hesitantly, the way a driver moves when they're not certain they're supposed to be there. I watched in the rearview mirror. The car stopped 20 feet back. The engine idled a few seconds, then went quiet. The door opened. Derek stepped out into the orange light. He stood beside his car, not the Audi Renee had taken something older, borrowed looking, and looked at my truck. Didn't come forward, didn't call out. Just stood there in the fading sunset like a man who'd driven 30 minutes to a place he wasn't sure would have him. I sat in the truck, hands still on the wheel. Scout woke up, looked out the back window, and didn't bark, just watched. Nadine's note sat folded in my jacket pocket. Forgive him. Not for Derek, for you. I didn't know whether I could do what she'd asked, but she'd been right about everything else. I opened the door. The bench had sat broken for 3 years. Nadine had written bench by oak needs fixing in her last notebook entry in 2023. 3 days before she died, and I knelt beside it the morning after Derek drove away in the dark without saying a word. Half-inch socket wrench in hand, finally ready to fix what she'd asked me to fix, long before I was ready to hear her asking. He had stood by his borrowed car for 10 minutes the night before. I'd watched from inside the truck engine, off hands resting on the wheel. He opened his mouth twice. Both times, nothing came out. Both times, he turned away from whatever word was forming and swallowed it back down. Then he got in the car and drove off without once glancing in the mirror. I didn't go after him, didn't call out. Nadine's note said, "Forgive him for my own peace, not for reconciliation." So I let him go, chose the bench instead. The morning air smelled of wet grass and oak leaves. Birds called from the kennels. The sound of 23 animals eating breakfast alive and safe. Scout slept in the shade beside me while I worked. 2 rusted screws came out without a fight. The tilted leg needed sanding where moisture had warped the wood. I worked in the cedar stain, matching the same color Nadine had used on the original bench in 1998, careful to get it exact. When I finished, I sat on the bench without immediately jumping to the next thing. Just sat. Scout woke up, patted over, and settled at my feet. I rested my hand on his head. Same thing we'd done together for 11 years. She wrote this in 2023, I told him. 3 days before she died, and she was still making a list of things that needed fixing. Still thinking about the bench. Still thinking about what I'd need after she was gone. He leaned into my leg. Didn't weigh in on the timeline. In there, I said, fixed like she wanted. 1 week after that, we hung the new sign at the main gate. No grand ceremony, no press coverage, just the people who'd stood watch when I drove back through these gates, gathered quietly to see the mission made permanent. The sign read, Callaway Ridge Animal Sanctuary and Veterinary Clinic / No Abandoned Soul Turned Away / founded by Vincent and Nadine Callaway, 1996. Petra stood to my left, Norbert to my right. Nadia filmed it on her phone for the record. Dr. Kepler leaned against his car. Callum stood in the back without his camera. Scout sat at my feet staring up at the sign as if he could read it. Nadine picked the font, I said. She was particular about things like that. A few people smiled. Nobody laughed. That felt right. Later, after everyone had gone, Petra asked, did she actually pick the font? Dasbai. Wamboind. No, I admitted. But she would have. She would have chosen exactly this one. She'd have had opinions about the letter spacing, too. Petra looked up at the sign. It looks like her, she said. That was the right thing to say. The sign hung level and clean, professionally made, but carrying Nadine's exact wording from the hand-painted original she'd put together in 1996. No abandoned soul turned away. I could still picture her painting those letters on plywood in the driveway. 7 months pregnant with Derek saying, this is what we're building, not a kennel, a promise. 27 years on, the promise was permanent, protected by trust law, engraved in metal that would outlast everyone standing here. Callum took no photographs. There was nothing left to document. The story was already written. That night, I sat in my truck outside the sanctuary. I didn't sleep there anymore, but tonight I needed to sit where I'd sat when everything fell apart now that everything was back together. Scout jumped into the passenger seat. His GPS collar still blinked every 30 seconds. I kept meaning to take it off, kept not doing it, or maybe I wanted the reminder tracked accounted for, not lost. I opened Nadine's notebook to the last page. Her handwriting bench by oak needs fixing. I pulled a pen from the glove box and wrote below her words, fixed. The ink took 3 seconds to dry on the old paper. 3 seconds where the word was still wet and could have been anything else. Then it was permanent, fixed. The bench, the sanctuary, the mission, the gate, everything she'd built, everything I'd fought to keep. I closed the notebook for the last time. 27 years of her handwriting, lists of medications and feed schedules and vet appointments. And that one-line bench by oak needs fixing with my single word beneath it now. Fixed. I set the notebook on the dashboard and left it there. The new sign hung in the glow of the streetlight metal letters, catching the orange light. No abandoned soul turned away. I looked at Scout. Let's go in. We're home. We got out of the truck and walked toward the gate together, the same walk we'd taken every morning for 27 years. Morning patrol checking the property, making sure no one had been left out overnight. Except, tonight, I wasn't walking out. I was walking in. Tonight I was the abandoned soul the sanctuary had caught. Abandoned by my son when he chose money over his mother's mission. Abandoned by certainty when Nadine died. Abandoned by the life I'd believed I would have, the one where my family stayed whole, and my wife didn't die, and my son didn't become someone I had to fight. But the gate had stayed open. The sanctuary had kept its promise. No abandoned soul turned away. Not even me. Scout walked beside me, nails clicking on the gravel, GPS collar blinking green in the dark. Both of us tracked. Both of us accounted for. Both of us home. I glanced up at the sign one last time. Nadine's words. Nadine's mission. Nadine's promise kept. We walked through the gate. Behind us the metal groaned the way it always had, left side catching on the post. Wanting oil, wanting attention, eventually, but not tonight. Tonight it stayed open. The kennels were quiet. The oak tree stood in the darkness. The bench sat level and solid beneath it. I'd spent 6 weeks building a case, exposed my son in front of 300 witnesses, signed away any chance of commercial profit to protect animals most of the world had forgotten existed, and fought to honor a promise Nadine had made before our son was even born. And I'd won. Not because Derek had lost everything. Not because Renee had been left behind the same way she'd intended to leave 23 animals. Not because the investigations would eventually bring them to account. I'd won because the gate was open and I walked through it and the sanctuary was still standing. Still doing what it had always been built to do, taking in abandoned souls. All of them. Even me. Scout and I made our way to the office. I unlocked the door. He went straight to his bed in the corner. I settled into Nadine's chair at her desk. It still held the scent of lavender soap. Outside, the sign caught the streetlight. No abandoned soul turned away. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Truly. This story asked a lot of me to carry, and it asked something of you to hear. I spent years believing that loyalty inside a family was something you could count on, that the people who stood beside you at the beginning would still be standing there at the end. What this cost me, the grief, the lost time, the nights in that truck watching the gate, I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I believe God doesn't let those seasons be wasted. The pruning that hurts the most is often the thing that lets the right things grow. I came back to a sanctuary still standing, a mission still intact, and a bench that finally, after 3 years, was level again. Here is what I'd want you to take with you. Document everything, not out of suspicion, but because the truth needs witnesses and paper holds up longer than memory. If someone shows you who they are through what they do to the vulnerable, believe them the first time. Don't wait for a second. Forgiving someone doesn't mean letting them back in. It means putting down a weight that was only ever hurting you. And if you find yourself pushed out of something you built with your own hands, don't leave quietly, but gather your proof before you make a sound. These are the kinds of father stories that don't make the news, but they happen in quiet neighborhoods and family businesses and sanctuaries built on promises. Dad's revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like a signed document, a folded note in a desk drawer, and a gate that stays open. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't yet followed his hidden revenge, there are more stories here worth your time. Thank you for listening. Take good care of yourself.